Wonderful. Hello, everyone. As Ian said, I'm Joe Nash, and I'm from Braintree. So if you haven't heard of Braintree, we're a payment processor. You've probably heard of our clients. We handle Uber, Airbnb, Minecraft. We do some really cool things, but essentially, we just help you get money. That's what we're for. So we've sponsored London Node User Group. I didn't manage to bring the full length of swag I usually do today, for a ridiculous story. If you want to see an example of a fantastic meetup organizer, Ian has had to put up with me forgetting that tonight is my own meetup and I've double booked myself. So my meetup's happening without me and I'm here. So anyway, as you probably already noticed, I speak quite fast. I run an open heckle policy. I'm from Essex, we have to speak fast to survive. If I do speak too fast and you need to repeat something, just heckle me. And I will slow down. So this is kind of a language agnostic talk. I'm here primarily to talk about user experience, to talk about security, and talk about video games. So video games are a very powerful and effective tool. But what is it that makes video games effective? What is it that makes you lean on the edge of your seat and tilt with racing controllers? What is it that makes you jump up and scream with joy when you win or cry when you lose? What is it that makes you do stupid stuff like this? This is my actual Steam profile. The Skyrim one was in a period of 2 weeks and did lead to me failing the exam. And that, of course, is immersion. When you play a video game, you become immersed. And to be immersed is, if you think it's the top one, immerse someone in liquid, you're probably in the wrong talk. To be immersed is, of course, to be involved deeply in something mentally. It's when something captures your attention. It's when it drags you into it. It's when someone builds a world around you and you get thoroughly engaged in that world and there's no seams in that world. The fabric of the world is complete and you feel totally involved in this experience. The experience has properly captured every aspect of your attention. And as developers, for your apps and your products to be successful, you need immersion. You don't want any gigantic cracks or seams opening up that will spoil your users' attention, that will break their contact with your app, because then you lose money, then you lose whatever it is you're trying to do. If it's a video game, you lose the narrative and they stop playing. If it's a product, they don't go through and buy and they don't check out. You lose that magical feeling. The worst possible thing you can do to break that immersion is to surprise your users. You don't want to throw something horrible in their face that makes them jump and makes them lose interest in what they're doing. So we're going to tell a little story. And this little story was actually a complete accident. Whilst I was actually genuinely trying to do this. So we're going to buy a teapot. I'm a user and I want to buy a teapot. I actually own this teapot, this particular teapot, but we're going to buy a new teapot. So I'm going to do what most users do when they want something. I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to search teapot shop. So I decide that I want to go to the teapot shop here, the top one, and I click on it. So already I've put in a bit of effort. I've actually gone out and I've put some effort into finding what it is I want. So I find the teapot shop. And this looks great. This looks very pretty. This looks like an immersive experience for buying teapots. So I think like, oh, I've got some options here. I could search. I could go for some categories. Either way, I'm going to be engaging a fair bit with this web app. I mean, it's not the most interactive example of a web app. There's no fun interaction going on. There's no games, but we are still interacting. There is still an opportunity to be immersed. So I decide I'm going to go to new arrivals. And I'm in new arrivals and there's this horrible blob of text, but that's fine. And I decide that I really, really like this one on the bottom left. This basket weave teapot, this $52 beautiful teapot. That's lovely. I'm really immersed in buying this and I put it in my basket. And at this point, I'm really, really excited. I really want this teapot. It's in my basket. I've put in the effort into finding it and I'm absolutely ready to click through and pay and give my money for this wonderful example of a teapot. And I'm ready to go and I'm ready to do it and I press checkout and I get hit in the face with this. And straight away, the immersion is broken, right? This is completely ruined. And to fill in some details of this, this isn't the whole form. If I want to see the whole form, I have to zoom out by 70% to get the whole form in there, or conversely, 30% zoom. When really all I wanted was the teapot. I just wanted them to shut up and take my money, right? And they managed to completely shatter my immersion. So the key lesson here is that immersion is fragile. All they were trying to do on the inverse was get my money, and that's a perfectly reasonable way. They need my billing address, they need the address it's shipping to, they need my credit card. Like, they don't think they're doing anything wrong, right? They don't realize that they're breaking this immersion. So we're going to talk on a little bit, and we're going to kind of see some ways in which we can save immersion, and we're also going to talk about some different kinds of immersion. Because what we're really trying to do here is stop us doing this. We're trying to maintain the magic. We don't want to kill it. We don't want to kill Santa. That doesn't help anyone. So the key way that I think is really useful, one of the easiest things you can do that I think is really help immersion is tokenization. So I'm going to quickly walk through tokenization. Anyone familiar with tokenization? I love this because very few people have put their hands up. It's a great new topic. Cool. So tokenization on the surface is a data security method, right? Essentially what you're doing is you're taking sensitive data that's lurking around in your app, like your user credentials or credit cards, and you're desensitizing it. We're replacing it with stuff that isn't dangerous if someone gets hold of it. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking something we care about, like adorable puppies, and we're replacing it with something we don't care about. So one way to think of tokenization is kind of like poker chips, right? So when you go to a casino, you replace the thing you care about, the thing that has actual value, the money, with poker chips. They have no value, you can just throw them around and you lose interest in what they represent and you freely gamble them away stupidly. The casinos have done a very clever trick there. They've immersed you by taking something you care about and replacing it with something you don't care about, so you lose all connection with that value and you freely spend. But it's also more secure because no one can just swipe your money off the table. So at Braintree, we do quite a lot of this. That's because we're part of the payments industry. And the reason tokenization is important is so you don't do silly things like this. It being a vital security method, it's recommended by the PCI DSS. If you don't know PCI DSS, basically it's the standards body created by all the bigwigs in the credit card industry to make sure that your data isn't lost. And essentially how Braintree use it is we take the credit card details, we send them up to the server, we tokenize them, and then you as a developer only ever get the token, so you don't have to deal with any of the sensitive information. That's fine. Payment details never go to your server, so we're compliant and your burden is lowered. You don't have to worry about how to securely store those. Great. Well, that's just on the surface. That's just what tokenization is as a security method. We're going to go much deeper, and we're going to see the other side. So what we're going to look at is how it helps you from a UX perspective. That GIF is amazing, isn't it? How did he do that? So we're going to look at how tokenization can help you avoid horrible things like this and how it can help you maintain the magic. So I mentioned earlier that there's several types of immersion. So these are the 4 types in rather cryptic images. We'll go through them very briefly. So what we're looking at here is on the top left, you have strategic immersion. That's the most obvious one. That's the deep mental involvement. Chess is a prime example of it. You're so engaged in trying to think for the moves in your head, and you're so engaged in how do I beat this problem, how do I solve this, how do I beat my opponent, that you completely zone in on it. It's the sort of thing that will bother you for weeks. Like you'll walk away from it, and in the back of your mind, it will still be working away, and then suddenly you'll have the idea in a shower. It's that sort of immersion. The top right, that's tactical immersion. That's when you're in touch with the experience. So a key example of this, one of my favorite examples, is does anyone commute regularly using a ticket machine a lot? Okay. If you're using one of those ticket machines quite regularly, like you go from a long train station and for some reason you don't have a monthly ticket, you tend to get into a flow of flicking through the ticket machine. You're like, oh, I know exactly where my station is. I want the single, I want the return, Oyster card, perfect. A great example of like breaking that is when they put in a new option there and suddenly you are no longer in touch with your experience. Spatial immersion, lots of people tend to confuse this with skeuomorphism. A way to bring someone into a space, to bring someone into a constructed world, is not to put a bookshelf in front of them and pretend it's an e-reader app. This is basically convincing someone that the experience they're feeling is the same as it would be in a real space. So when we apply this to development, although what they're doing on the web, what they're doing on the mobile, can never mimic, say, what they do in the real world. Like if it's a shop, the online store experience is fundamentally different from the real world, right? You're not walking in, there's no cashier and that sort of thing. We can still mimic that experience to a point where it feels natural, where they feel immersed with that. And the narrative is the easiest one to explain, the most obvious one. This is the one that comes from video games. When something presents you a story, and you can easily slot yourself into that story, and you can imagine yourself in that story. This is why books are so immersive, this is why films are so immersive. You feel narratively immersed, you can place yourself as a character in that narrative. So we're going to start by talking about strategic immersion. So a key thing with strategic immersion is it's challenging. That doesn't mean difficult. So, for example, when we talk about challenging versus difficult, is this challenging or is this difficult? This is just difficult. There's no mental engagement here, and there's no interesting problem to solve. It's just drudgery and boredom filling out this credit card form. So how do we solve this sort of problem? Obviously, it's tokenization, the title of this talk. So I've been droning on a minute. You probably already forgotten what tokenization is. Just a reminder, it's taking something we care about and replacing it with something we don't. So when we get to examples of this, there's a really obvious example of how we can avoid these giant forms, and that's, of course, one-click checkouts. So there's already some of these existing around already. They're all disparate. They're all owned by different shops. For example, there's Humble Bundle. There's Amazon's famous Buy Now, One Click. Basically, they retain your payment details as a token, and then when you come to check out, they've already they retrieve that token and they put your payment details through. There's no security concerns there because they're not just like leaving your credit card lying around ready to use. They've got the token, which they then send off to their tokenization server, get the actual details in the back end where it's all nice and secure, and then they do the payment. There's now a kind of universal option for this. This is kind of the most salesy bit of the talk, I apologize. We've recently released One Touch, which basically means anywhere you're logged in with PayPal works anywhere else. So if you log in with the app on your mobile phone, you can go to any website that uses PayPal and you don't have to log in, you don't have to fill out the credit card form, it's just there, which is quite a neat thing. So the main thing here is that tokenization does not only help us maintain the magic, but tokenization is total magic. We managed to completely remove a gigantic credit card form and hide that from the users and keep them immersed. So, almost tactical immersion. So as I said earlier, this is being in touch with something. And I find the best way to push me out of touch with your app, to push me out of touch with your website, any experience, is throw a capture in my face. Oh my God. When I'm expecting to check out and I'm expecting to register and suddenly there's a capture in the way, doesn't it just make you twitch? Makes me angry. So there's a way we can solve this. Hey, it's tokenization, what a surprise. So let's take something we care about. This one's controversial, and replacing it with something we don't care about. So, authentication. If we know that a user is a user and they've authenticated and we've gone through things before which are userly actions aren't robotic actions, why are we testing them every time? We can store their actions, we can store their authentication as a token. So a token doesn't just have to be authentication, a token can be any sensitive data. Examples of this include browser strings. As you probably all know, browser strings can tell you an awful lot about a person. Google uses them in their capture engine to as part of the process where they identify you as a robot or not. And also user actions. So we can store all these ridiculously sensitive things in a token along with user authentication details and use them to identify whether people are robots and thus bypass need for captures. Tokenization is magic. This one's also an amazing gift. Look at that guy. It's crazy. So, narrative immersion. This one's one of the stories here is one of my favorite ones. So Uber, as a company, tell you a very compelling story. A story that I absolutely love. They tell you that you as a customer can order a cab effortlessly, get in that cab and not worry about a thing. You just get to your destination, you get out, you've had a great time, payment's gone through, whatever, it's easy. A lot of other taxi companies try and tell the same story, but they all miss a little trick, which I think Uber does very well, and that's that they don't deal with the payment on the other end very well. So say your battery runs out, you don't have any signal, quite a few of the taxi companies very cleverly think, oh, we'll give them the option to pay with cash as well. But then if you have to choose whether you're paying with cash or with the stored payment method, you lose the ability, you lose that seamlessness. They've lied to you about the narrative immersion. If my battery runs out, if I don't have signal on the other end, I have to pay with cash, even though I don't necessarily have it. So Uber managed to narratively immerse you in a very good way and avoid a total crazy taxi situation where you get to the end and you're like, awkward, my phone's died, we need to go to a cash point. So if you are one of those taxi apps that has managed to do it this wrong way around, that has managed to make my journey uncomfortable at the end, how do we solve this? Well, there's this thing called tokenization. You're probably seeing a trend here. And we're taking something we care about and replacing it with something we don't. So, I'm so sorry, Michael Bay. Don't sue me. So, an example of this is storing payment methods. So again, there's one in PayPal, but there's one in every payment provider. We can take that payment method, and because of tokenization, we can store it securely and use it later, very much like with the one click, but this way, there's no user interaction at all. If the payment method is stored, we can just bill it later wherever we want. Almost every payment API provides you a way to do future billings as long as they pre-authenticated, which you usually do on registering the app and putting your payment method in. Tokenization is total magic, it saves us the hassle and just keeps narrative immersion. So, spatial immersion, in which I mainly have a go at skeuomorphism for ages. So as I mentioned earlier, spatial immersion is feeling like you are in the experience you are in real life. This is not putting material patterns on everything and calling it a bookshelf. What spatial immersion is, and what a great example of spatial immersion is, I think it's best to look at Evernote. This is an awful image illustrating what I mean, but hopefully you'll still be able to get the picture as I explain it. So Evernote is obviously a note-taking app, but they managed to replicate the experience of having a paper notebook very well. So one of the things that's powerful about paper and powerful about books is you have a very spatial awareness aspect around it. You know roughly where a given note is for your book because you know when you wrote the note, you know where you were, you know how far in it is. You can flick through. You can't do that on a computer. But Evernote have a lot of ways of cataloging notes in different ways. They have a geography feature. If you write a note in a certain place, it remembers that. So you can think, oh, I was in this restaurant, and you can look a note up by that. They have like a million different ways of tagging things. They have titles. They have summaries. They have categories. They have notebooks. Basically, they do everything they can to mimic that power of being able to flick through a notebook, the real life spatial experience. So Evernote narratively immersed you. On the contrast, a lot of the things we've spoken about that violate strategic immersion and tactical immersion, like the horrible checkout experiences, actually violate spatial immersion as well. If I go to a physical store and I walk up to the checkout and I want to pay with card, I don't suddenly then have to put in every single one of my details. I don't have to put in like my postcode and well, unless you go to Debenhams, you just put your postcode in for Debenhams. I've never figured that out. But anyway, I don't put my address or anything like that. I just put my card in and pay. Great. So when we get to those problems, how do we keep spatial immersion intact? Well, again, tokenization. It's taking something we care about and replacing it with something we don't. There's the question of which language was he going to choose there? This is a really nice slide, so I can change this for other languages. So I did this talk at PolyConf in a 5-minute lightning version, and that's a talk about basically every language. It's just a polyglot conference. They'd spoken about literally every single language, including obscure ones like Idris and God knows what else, except PHP. And when I did this, I actually got a standing ovation for it. They really hate PHP in Poland. So here, tokenization actually improves the experience. So as I mentioned earlier, physical stores. If I go to a physical store and I walk up to the counter and I want to pay, I don't know, with an Amex, everyone who's got an Amex probably knows this problem, and I get to the counter, I want to pay with an Amex, and they don't accept it, and I have nothing else, what do I do at that point? I'm just kind of screwed. I either put my item back on the shelf and go find somewhere to get cash, which I probably won't be able to because I've only got an Amex, or I offer to mop the floors. There's nothing you can really do in that situation, you're just kind of stuck. But when we can talk about tokenization, we have this concept of payment method nonce, or a payment method token. And basically, it's a massive token, but it can represent everything. That token in the background. Does that look like a PayPal to you? Probably not. Does it look like an Android Pay? Probably not. Bitcoin? Yeah. It could be anything. It could be any payment method we want. It could be credit card, it could be cash, well, it can't be cash, I'll be stupid. It could be Apple Pay, it could be Android Pay. And that's because tokens have the power of genericity. They are, my boss thinks I made this word up. I didn't, that's just how Haskellers speak. So we have this power of genericity. It can be anything we want, which is a very powerful idea, because when we look at developers, when you as developers need to come along and build something, we can accept any payment method. We don't have to deal with anything weird in the back end. We don't have to have edge cases for PayPal, for Coinbase, for credit card, because it's just a token. As long as we can deal with a token of a certain type, we can deal with any payment method that can be translated into that token, which is everything. So tokenization saves our art of spatial immersion. Tokenization is magic. There's one final thing. And this is that immersion is not just by developers. It's not just something that you provide to your customers in your experiences in your app. It's actually something that can be provided for you. So as I mentioned earlier, when there's new payment methods, if you're using tokenization, because you don't have to deal with anything in the back end, you don't have any new code. So that form I showed you earlier with the PayPal and the Coinbase, that's a Braintree form. And basically, we and many others are using tokenization to immerse you as developers. When we provide you a token as a payment method, you don't have to update your code if there's a new payment method that comes out. Say next week another tech company releases something pay, which of course they will because that's the big thing this year. You don't have to change any of your code to support that. You just have to wait for us to support it, and then it magically appears in your app. So you kind of get this idea of over-there updates of payments for your payment integrations, which is really cool. And this can be provided by pretty much anything. So when you're doing social authentications, as long as they provide you a token in some sort of way, you probably don't have to do anything weird to deal with that. Of course, there's many competing standards, so in reality you do. But in the future, you could see a use of tokenization where it's gradually replacing more and more parts of your app that you would have to update. And it completely removes that. So it immerses you as developers and it keeps you happy. And in summary, tokenization is magic. So I finished quite a bit early, which I think Ian will be happy about. Cool. So thank you everyone, I'm Joe Nash. If you have any questions, I'll be around for approximately 10 minutes. I've got to get back to my meetup. But yeah, thank you for listening everyone.